Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. We're back with another episode in the Ultimate Mixing Series. This week we're going to be talking about 7 different ways to mix a snare. We're going to be looking at 7 different songs by different mixers, and we'll show you how they mixed the snare. So we're going to start off with a punk song with Mr. Cameron Webb. Cameron is a good friend. He's quite well known for doing 6 Motorhead records, working with Social D and Pennywise, and a lot of other great rock and punk bands. In this one, Cameron is going to show us how he takes a top mic, a bottom mic, and then actually incorporates, dare I say it, a snare sample. And he mixes it to really create enough crack from the top and enough sizzle from the bottom.
And the snare drum is similar to the kick, where I use the bussing. I'm taking the snare and I'm taking in this case, I am taking a snare, top mic, a bottom mic on the snare, and then I'm taking a sample, which is, it says sample SR, sample sound replacer. But obviously I would start with the real core drums first and try to dig out something that I think is interesting. A lot of times I won't mute the kick. I'll leave the kick in there. If we look again, another compressor. Compression to me is more important than EQ, so you see I use a lot of compression. Not always that aggressively, but I'm using a bunch of it. Here, I chose to go compressor and then an EQ, because if you look here, I'm digging out some 227, and I remember when I did this, once I had the mix up and going, the snare just sounded a little bit boxy, and it stuck out too much. So by digging these frequencies out, it helped me clean it up a little bit. I start with that snare, and then I work with this bottom snare too, and I listen. I want to hear. I want to hear crack from the top, but I want to hear sizzle from the bottom. So to me, you see my levels. My normal snare is, my top snare is at 0, and my bottom snare is like snare is minus 15. If I had it cranked up, it wouldn't sound as good. It'd sound too. Yeah. I take the automation off. Sounds good, but it won't blend with this whole mix when I pull it up together. So I do the same thing. I combine it to a sub. I take that sub. I get rid of some bottom end that I worry about. More compression. Not aggressive compression. My ratio is only at 3:1. It's not hitting that hard. I'm not even seeing it all hitting because I haven't put in the sample yet. And then another little EQ, and that probably came later on when I put it up with everything. I need a little bit more juice. Sample. I take a sample. What sample did I use today? Use a sample called the Sonar Ballad snare. And the funny thing about this snare is so many people use this snare. It's everywhere. I remember a kid sending me demos once from Chicago, and I was like, wow, that snare sounds pretty good. And I go, what'd you use, a Sonar Ballad? And he's like, yeah, how'd you know? And it's like, because I use it, and I like it. It's a snare that helps add elements that sometimes I'm lacking. It puts it in there. It gives me some of the brightness, but it also has a little bit of bottom end in it. So to me, it's a control thing that it helps me with. So basically, in general, I'll put those snares in with the kick drums. I'll listen and I'll tweak and I'll say, okay, how does it sound? So the kick sounds pretty loud to me right now, but I really don't know if it's going to be loud or quiet. I just think it sounds good, so I'll kind of just let that be, and I'll start opening up the other mics. Because once I start opening up like the room mics, things start to take a little bit of change.
So let's change genres quite dramatically. Next up, we have Mr. Matt Lange, who is a well-known electronic music producer and remixer. Matt creates 2 snares using his Euro rack. He also gets very creative with automation, as well as editing one of the snares for a glitched retardando effect.
And let's spread it out a little. So I think there are a couple ways we could do this. I mean, I think maybe with this, what would be nice if we just have it kind of spread around our head. So just like an auto panner kind of thing. Oh, you know what? I'm not gonna use an auto panner because we're in 7/8, we're not in 4/4. So manual it is. So let's go to our pan. Let's have it, and this is all personal choice. So I'm gonna have it start all the way on the left. And by the time it gets to the next hit, it's gonna go back. And yeah, we'll basically have it jump back and forth the entire time, but it always starts on that initial downbeat, or I guess the snare hit, I should say. And then maybe on the last one, we'll have some variation. That's what we'll do. We'll do an edit there. Okay. But for the time being, so let's call this percussive verb. And let's use a different kind of reverb. And maybe, because I want this not to be as bright, I'm going to use the Liquid Sonic's Seventh Heaven, which is the Bricasti verb, basically. And it sounds definitely more tones down, which is nice. I want a hall, though, not a plate. And I like Berliner. And I also want to take out really like that initial tone. And then the harmonic as well. Great. Okay. So now this should sound a lot more interesting. Let's do a little edit just to make this cool, unnecessarily, but cool nonetheless. And let's also take off the automation follows edit, because that's going to be really annoying right now. So let's find a good hit. Oh, that's good. Well, that'll be perfect for, let's say, a 64th note roll. It might be too fast, but we can always edit it later. And again, this is just audio editing. We can make that more interesting. We can definitely make that more interesting. So start from scratch. And let's start it, say, here at this bar. And this is just straight up in the grid and just spreading things out. So it's going to do a bit of a retardando. And might be a little much. Or maybe it should be flipped. Maybe it should accelerate into. Well, let's see how it sounds. And I also, now that I have this effect in there, I want the panning to do a very, very obvious trick right there. Then we can have it drop back down. So with the snare, let's see how this sounds. Let's give it a kick too. Oh, and maybe on that last one, you know what? We get rid of the little filtery guy. So, grooving all together. And let's have one more effect. Like I want just kind of a, so let's put like some kind of clap on that last snare hit. So we could do it ourselves. For the sake of time, I'm not gonna show you how to record a clap. I think you can figure that one out. But, or whatever, ML snaps. Here's some good stuff. That'll work. Pneumonia snap from when I had pneumonia. And I decided the best thing I should do is record snaps because obviously my fingers were sick too. You can hear the difference, right? So here's pneumonia snap. And we're going to layer that underneath the snare, and let's give that a big verb. And I'm actually just going to put that reverb directly on the channel, which I don't often do, but for this, it's fine. And you know what? I'm going to compress the hell out of that snap before we even get there too. And I mean, this is one of my favorite things ever, is the Eventide Omnipressor, just for sheer absolute compression destruction, compressive destruction. I mean, this thing sounds incredible. So super short attack time, super short release, and then drive the output. That's exactly what I want. Yeah, I mean, it's just so gnarly. And then we add the verb. And with the other things, I think this should sound awesome. Poor cat. Oh, we didn't hear that. You know what? Let's put more compression after the verb, so it's really in your face. It's going to be loud as all hell too, and it's going to need a lot of EQ. So let's put that before the compression is like somewhere around there probably. Let's do a shorter reverb. Gotta love compression. Oh man, that should actually sound really cool with all the other stuff. So let's just hear the percussion without anything else. Maybe up the mix a little bit on that last compressor, so it sucks a little more. Yeah, cool. And then the other thing I'm going to do is where we just put this this omnipressor snap thing. I'm going to render that down because I really want to control the tail. So now you see how there's all this tail of the reverb. I don't want it. Let's get rid of that. So now it's just going to be a really hard cut. Yeah, I think that's cool.
So next up is me, mixing a song by the rather wonderful Little Empire, which are a pop indie band. There's some key stuff, there's electric guitars, and it's a girl-fronted band with Lily Lewis as the lead singer. This is a blend of a very simply recorded drum track in there. So it's just top and bottom snare, really simple, no room mics or anything like that, blended with, dare I say it, a sample. But it will give you an idea of how you can dramatically increase the aggression on a snare and make it fit a relatively dense pop rock track. What I'm looking for is grace notes in the snare. He's either playing them too softly and they're not being picked up, or they're accidental. So I'm sort of listening to other microphones to see what I'm hearing. Live kick in. Now, sometimes drummers are playing very, very defined grace notes, and other times they're just kind of letting the stick bounce backwards and forwards. And that's where it can get sticky. Haha, for want of a better pun. You're not sure whether that bounce back is a good thing or not. So let's have a listen again. What I'm going to do here is just make those waveforms a little bigger so I can check it out better. I've got some samples here. So I have things that are playing straight hits on those main beats. So why am I talking about that? Well, it means I might be able to get a little crazy. Like for instance, let's have a listen to the snare top. Snare bottom. Now, you can hear some of the snares being triggered by the kick. I want to try something. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. I am going to take the snare and I'm going to group it separately. Keep that in mind. Put that on the back burner. I'm going to take that snare and then duplicate it and annihilate it. Compress it really, really heavily. So there's kind of an energy snare track. And then what we could do is we could take the kick drum or its sample and then sidechain that into that energy track so that when the kick plays, it sucks down the snare. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. So keep that on the back burner. But at the moment, this is just the snare on its own. It's not a bad sound. It's infinitely better than the kick was. It's a little 700-ish. Let's go and grab an EQ again. Again, I just love the simplicity of an REQ. I think I'm going to go to, let's say, 90 where it defaults. And then take like 110 and boost. That's one place to boost, but I think I might sit my bass in about 110. So let's do something else and go to 220. There's definitely some body on there. So let's bring this high pass up a little bit. Let's bring up a lot of that ring when I do that. But quite often, I could sit there and cut some of that mid-range, or else I could just boost the frequencies above that. Now, you might say, well, you know, I've been led to believe that you're always supposed to, you know, cut rather than boost. Well, somewhat true, but obviously remember cutting and then high passing can do very similar things because then what you have to do is turn up the gain. So it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen the other. So I'm going to go down to about 7K here and boost it like crazy. So I'm taking the output here and just cutting it so it's not clipping. Now, don't get me wrong, we're on the latest versions of our DAW here. It's hard to make this clip. But, you know, I try to avoid seeing red lights. If it's just an occasional red light, it's okay. But there's no need at an early stage to invite that. If I built a whole mix up and later on in the mix I'm seeing a couple of red lights, I'm going to let it go, a couple of like potential clipping. But here, why? I'm not fighting with anything. I'm rebalancing things as I go anyway. So this is fine. Let's just keep it clean. Now I'm going to listen to the snare bottom. I'm actually going to copy this EQ down just to see what we get. Put the two together. The two together, there's a definite, really good mid-range shift, which I like. It's got rid of some of that honkiness. That's just copying the EQ down. Now you could bust those two elements together and then do a generic EQ across both. That may have worked in this instance. You know, this is part of the process. As you're doing things, you make these decisions. So I could take that off now and bust them together and do it, but I'm not, because I'm going to do a couple of other fun things and see what our snare samples are doing. So wow, doing. It's interesting, all three together is definitely better than any one element. So if I put all three on together, these addictive samples have reverbs in them. You can hear it clear as day. Going to listen to the samples just together on their own. That hard rock Tama one has a kind of SSL spank that I love. And if you look at it for a second, I can show you why. It's got a very, very exaggerated attack at the front. Which I like. I want it to be a little brighter, so it has even more bite. So I'm going to grab just an REQ2, and I'm just going to go to the default area here and crank it. Okay, so there's a lot of mid in it. Go listen to this one at the top. But that one's all mid-range. Two together. Remove the mid-range from that SSL-y sounding Tama. Let's see what happens throwing the live snare in. See, that one has all the body. It's very tempting now to grab an EQ on this one and boost some low lows. See, hear the before and after, so here's no EQ. Throw in the live snare. All the live drums. And now the kick samples, which we can create a group on. catch-22. If I take the EQs off those two snares, it's got some good mid-range aggression. Put it back on. If I put the EQ back on, it sounds a little bit more like what I want a snare to sound like. One of the problems when you get samples is you get that. You get undynamic kind of moments. So we'll probably have to go in there and draw those in with automation. Next up, we have mixing hip-hop with Ariel Chobaz. Ariel shows us a trick in a hip-hop track where he starts by controlling the dynamics of the snare, but then duplicates the snare and processes the duplicated snare quite differently to blend it in for more attack. It's a great trick because it's just one snare sound, but he's able to blend the two elements to give him more or less attack where he needs it in the track.
So we got a snare here. And I'm gonna leave this up here just so you guys can see what's going on. It's definitely got more top end. Now for this, again, I don't want to touch it too much. You know, I always like to control the dynamics a little bit. I feel like the more you control the dynamics, the easier it is to mix. So again, this, I'm not doing anything special on this. It's again, just a way for me to just make sure that it's barely being controlled, and I mean barely. So again, partly because it's printed so hot, you can see, I mean, it's going right up to 0. So even with the threshold set at 0, I'm still getting compression. Not much, again, it's like the kick, 2 dB, but just enough to control it a little bit. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this. We're gonna do basically the same kind of thing. I don't think this is gonna need too much more attack, but in case we need it, I just like to set it up. That way when I'm mixing, I can be more in the vibe of things and not the technical side of things. So here we go. We can start with, again, a great preset for starting off on this snare. So you guys can hear it's really working, right? Raw. It's thick. Here. Well, yeah, all you're getting is that little bit of attack. So let's go ahead and get the threshold right. I'm just trying to find that point where basically the main part of that attack is coming through, but all that tail stuff is being removed. And that's sounding pretty good right about there. Now for this, because there's no quick snares, you know, I'm just looking at the arrangement, it's all pretty steady. I think I can go with a little bit longer of a release. So cool. With a longer release, less of that tail is coming out because it's taking longer for it to get back to 0. So let's hear where that is. And without it, with it, that's sounding pretty good. Now, I don't think I need to EQ too much of this guy because it has kind of everything I want and nothing I don't. And again, this is just in case I need it. So let's get rid of all this stuff. And just try to blend it in, see what we're working with, see how they sound together. Now, it already has a lot of attack, so I don't think we'll need much of this. You can hear it's really adding like the whack, you know. So it's really pushing the snare outside of the speakers instead of being like this really crushed snare. It's allowing you to add in the attack to really make it jump out at you. You hear that? Now, I'm just going to use a little bit of it. I don't want it to be too aggressive.
Next up, we have Justin Cortelyou, who's working with the Canadian country artist Johnny Reid. Justin takes us through his hybrid mix of the snare. In this track, he doesn't want to hear too much character, but instead wants more of a marching snare drum sound. Now, we don't have visual of the analog processing adjustments made, but Justin explains in detail what he is doing, so use your ears for this one.
So here's the, this is the SM77. So let's take the EQ out. That's not bad. So what I'm listening for here, I like the deep snare sound, the attack, and the snare rattle. I mean, that's all good. I want to listen for any ringing that I don't want to hear in the track. This isn't a song where I really want a character snare. I want more of just a marching straight up. So I don't want to hear too much ring. It's a little one. Let's check the tone. It's also good to check the tuning. So it's not quite in tune with the track. So I am going to take it out because we just don't need it. That's better. Now, I like to have a little bit of 1K on these kind of things. So that's kind of nice. Gets it to cut through the track. And so I'm expanding a little bit. Let's get a little bit of compression going. These signals are pretty low. He's playing really soft. And when you're recording, we tracked 14 songs in 2 days. So when you're moving at that speed and all overdubs, everything done, you don't have time to really dial in all of your settings. So I set it. I don't use a whole lot of EQ. I don't use much compression because I don't know how dynamic it's going to be. So I have a safer level. And so when he plays soft, it's not ideal to have a too low of a signal, but we are working at 24 bits, so it's not like you're losing any resolution. And we have a really good signal to noise, a really good noise floor here. The power is really clean, so it doesn't create too much of an issue to gain something up afterwards. But if you do have the luxury of time, it's good to get a nice healthy level, not too much. You don't have to eat up all your bits. That's from 16-bit. That's from a long time ago. Don't worry about getting maximum level. your converters, a lot of times, especially the burls that have transformers, you can play into that. You can hit them a bit harder if you want to get a little more color out of them, or you can hit them a bit softer if you want a cleaner sound. So that's one of the big mistakes I see with engineers is recording too loud. You just don't need to do it anymore. So I did want some more compression. I wouldn't, I might just bring up the gain. I mean, it's no big deal. So here I am getting a bit more. I kind of like that. Now I'm gonna see if he gets any louder. He does. So let's see. It's still not bad, but I might not even need that move. So that's with a fast attack. The slow attack, it just doesn't really do anything. So I like the fast attack. A little bit more. That's pretty good. Now let's listen to, this is the KM140. You can hear instant tonal difference. A lot more low end, not as much mid range. That's what makes the two, they complement each other very well. That's without an EQ. It's a pretty flat, not too exciting. So let's add this. I'm opening up the top end, little shelf at say 10K, 3 dB of boost. And then this is a little 4.5, 3 dB or so, and rolling off some of the low end shelf. Let's put in the compressor. Let's go back to that. And now that we're compressing it, we can kind of hear that. That's it. You don't always need to take all the character out of a drum, but just in this case, you just don't need it. So it's just taking up space, and it's going to ring throughout the song and out of key. So I'm just going to take it out. And it's not all the way out, but it's out enough that it's not going to bother me. So we'll see how much of that I want. I can now blend those two tones together. It's the 140. That's the 77.
Next up, we have my good friend, the rather wonderful Mr. Bob Marlette. This is a hard rock song, and Bob takes us through mixing a snare using multiple duplicates of the original snare, mixed differently and blended together along with how he likes to use his samples.
Here's the original snare that was recorded with nothing on it. The only thing I put on there is a little bit of gate just to control the ring so I don't have too much ring on it. That's another thing, that it's a per case basis, deciding how much ring you do or don't want on a snare. I tend to record a snare with a little bit more ring and life, because that way then I can choose to go whatever direction I want to go in terms of ring or not ring. Here's the snare that's the snare that's recorded without the gate. So I'm just sort of controlling it. So this is with no EQ or anything. Then the next zone is all about focusing the low end, getting as much of the thump as I can out of it. Same essential process as the kick, having a gate on it, and then the EQ, making sure I got a pretty good bump at 200, because that's kind of where most snares have a, that's kind of the bottom. In almost all snares have roughly the same frequency of bottom, where you find that kind of bump of the low end is going to be around 200. This one I'm taking out a little bit of the mid so I can really focus the low end. So I'm subtracting a little bit at 2.5, but as always, it's a per case basis. You listen to it, make a decision on what you want this snare to sound like, whether you're being influenced by another record or whatever. That's always a good thing to do, is don't be afraid to A/B against other records and go, wow, I listen to that record. Every time I hear that record, I love the sound of that snare or that, whatever. Is don't be afraid to put up that song, put up that reference point, and listen to it and analyze what they're doing and go, okay, now how can I be influenced by that? I'm not a huge fan of copying, but I am a big fan of being influenced by, because that's really a valuable thing, is to understand the importance of being influenced by. Because there's a lot of people over the years of a lot of records that I've made where people are like, oh, dude, I totally got your, I totally love what you did on this record or that record, and that's great. And I love that. I love to see that from new artists is listening and being influenced by. Okay, the next track here is the mid, more like crack, So, and then the next one is the top. And then I have the bottom snare, which is our super bright kind of thing. So now, when you stick them all together, you got your low thump, and then you have, from the snare, you got kind of all of the aspects that you need. Now, generally, I derive more of the actual lows on a snare, low for a snare being in the 200 range. Generally, I derive more of the lows from the sample side. Take this off so I can show you the difference between this. That's the sample. So that's a lot of the body and depth and a little sizzle of the top. But when you listen to that, you go, well, that doesn't sound anything like what the actual final snare is. But you blend in the real snare, it just sounds like the real snare with a lot of body and depth to it. Same principle as the kick. You get certain components from the samples and you get certain components from the live, and then it's blending the two together to create the perfect sound. Yeah, let me do this. Now, here you go. It's like, a lot of nice body and depth. Cool.
Last but no means least, I am going to do another little Empire song, and this is for a Slate course that I did, so it's using only Slate plugins. It's the song Bullet, and again, you'll see how I work when I'm working entirely in the box, mixing live drums and programmed elements, and of course, in this instance, another snare sample. say it ain't so. Okay, let's listen to the snare top and snare bottom together. Sound like a 57 on the snare, not particularly exciting if I listen to the top on its own. I can tell he's like hitting the snare and just leaving the stick on the snare. Doesn't have any snap. Hasn't really got any rim. It's kind of a dull, not very well played snare. But very typical of what most of us get to mix. So I think what we're going to do before we do anything else is use that gate. I'm going to do this on individual elements. Some people would combine these two together and then bus them and then gate them, but I'm actually going to gate them independently because they may need different sort of feel. So go to the virtual mix rack again. Let's grab the gate. So just the snare top. It's nice. Let's bring that range down. So the range actually goes to the right. So if I turn that range knob to the right, it's got less of the bleed coming through. The nice thing about using a range control is you get the gate to shut on and off, and sometimes it's too aggressive. So it just sounds like it's going bap, 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 and it doesn't suit the music. So your range allows some of that bleed to come back through. I haven't adjusted any of the filters or anything down there. It seems to be working. I'm tempted to just copy that down to the bottom snare and see what it does. So now we're listening to the one on the bottom snare here. I didn't do any of the fancy gating stuff. Okay, so what am I not hearing? I'm not hearing body, not hearing any kind of oomph on the snare. So let's go just to the snare top for a second. So let's grab something Neve-ish, something that, sounds like an EQ I would use when recording, which would be the FGN. I like this. Oh, so this is continuously variable. That's really nice on the high passing. So let's go to the 110 area. Again, continuously variable. And then let's go to 7K. Sometimes you just have to do not be afraid to just give it some pizzazz. I'm going to hit the line amp harder. Turn it off. On. Infinitely better. We're aggressive. Being very aggressive on that EQ. Let's go to the snare bottom. And I'm going to pick the same EQ. So the FGN. Drive it. Hitting a bit harder. So, like I said, he didn't play the rim. There's no real amazing attack on it, but now it's got some snare bottom and it's got, it's got a bit of bite up there and it's got some body. So now let's throw in some samples. Wow. So there's our ring. Now, with dense tracks, rings like that are going to disappear completely. I know in solo it's quite terrifying. You're like, oh no, I don't want my snare to ring. Well, I wouldn't let it worry you. Okay, let's see what else we got. Oh, wow. That's all attack and ambience. So let's go back to our ringing snare for a second. And you see here, I'm just going to put up the gate here. Turn it off. Put that. Let's take the range down. So it's not quite so aggressive. So it doesn't feel like it's just shutting off quite so much. Throw in our ambient one. I like the ambience a lot, and I don't know if I need quite so much of the attack. So, why don't we try something a bit more fun? So what I'm going to do is mess with it a little bit with some compression. So what I'm going to do, of course, for those of you who might be guessing, is I'm going to grab the FG stress. It's just so cool. It's bringing up all that ambience. We can go to nuke. Love it. So let's hear that all together. All right. Let's see what this last snare's doing. I'm taking the FG stress off. Deciding I don't like it. Okay, so I like it, but it was exaggerating too much of that. It was kind of cool. What I'm thinking is like parallel compression on the overall drums is going to do a lot of that. So this is with it off. I like this new one. It's adding a lot of low mid to it. On its own, it sounds horrible and boxy. Start blending it with the others. Thanks ever so much. Hope you enjoyed that. Please check out the other videos in the Ultimate 7 series. Have a marvelous time recording, and in this case, of course, mixing. Speak to you all again very soon. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, adio, tschüss, goodbye.